an evil property developer, although if I go out to dinner parties as I was last night with Shelter in Manchester, I can try to describe myself as being at the more socially acceptable end, but it didn't help. As a business, Igloo are trying to find better ways to do property development. And one of the concentrations for us at the moment is on community-led development. So we're trying to help communities do things like building new homes, refurbish derelict buildings, undertake regeneration. And particular relevance, I guess, to today is I'm working with the amazing people from the Ancoats Dispensary Trust. They're trying to save a derelict. It's hard to describe how bad it is. The roof was taken off a few years ago. Grade 2 listed hospital building where amazing things have happened. Medical innovations in Victorian times. Lowry's only interior painting, and of course curing lots of people from the local community over the years. So that's kind of the main reason why I'm here today, but the other reason is I'm also a broker in the Brick Brokers pilot, where we're trying to use those kinds of experiences to work out how best to make private sector community partnerships work, particularly in relation to the HLF Heritage Enterprise Scheme.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm Jess. I've worked in and with local communities as an independent activist since 1992, particularly in Deptford and Hastings. But I've also been privileged for the last 13 years to work in dozens of neighbourhoods around the country through the National Community Forum, the British Urban Regeneration Association, Locality, and now through Jericho Road, which is also working with Ancoats Dispensary Trust. And over the years I've had various personal encounters with developers, including taking the Barclay Group up to my 16th floor flat on Pepys Estate to show them why they shouldn't build a cappuccino deck to look down on all of the people of the estate. I've experienced quite acute development pressure, both in Hastings and in Deptford, where the councils were literally on their knees begging developers to come and build anything. I think too often developers and communities meet only in planning committees, in that adversarial environment, and the idea of how we were going to get to real partnerships is what was behind the Brick Brokers partnership. Brick Partnership Brokers pilot. I hope we get to say more about that in a moment. Just to say right now, in case we don't, that we have already 2 pilots that we're working with in Bognor and Bradford, and we have 2 places for further pilots, which it'd be great if you would talk to either me or my colleague Karen Simnett, who's somewhere in the audience, if you think your project would benefit from that.
Thanks, Jess. I'm obviously sitting in the wrong place because I should be between the two of you. I'm Boase. I'm Head of Planning and Public Protection at Denbighshire County Council. Boradar, good morning to everyone. Denbighshire County Council is a unitary authority based in central North Wales, for those of you who don't know us. We've got a very small coastal strip with the seaside towns of Rhyl and Prestatyn. Most people know and heard of Rhyl. And then we go inland southwards down to Llangollen and Corwen. And we've got a number of small market towns in the county where we have an AONB in our area, numerous conservation areas and hundreds of listed buildings. The service that I manage is planning and public protection. That has a diverse range of functions in there. Obviously planning policy, development management stuff, but also building control, trading standards, environmental health, licensing. And actually, if we get the chance later on, it might be interesting to talk about how some of those things might be able to, some of those functions might be able to help in the context of listed buildings. It's not just planning, and there might be a chance to talk a little bit about that later on. The biggest conservation project we're involved in is Denby Hospital, which is a very large early 1800s former asylum hospital, architecturally, culturally and socially a very important building. It's derelict now. It's owned by an offshore company that have done nothing with it for about 10 years. We've served an urgent works notice. We've gone in and carried out the works in default, which was quite a brave brave or foolish thing for us to do, but I think it was brave. We've served a repairs notice. That's not been complied with, and we've served the CPO papers to compulsory purchase the building. And the deadline for the appeal for the owner is the end of this month, so we wait to see whether he appeals or not. We've had loads of support from PRT, so if you want to know anything about that building, ask Ros, because she probably knows as much about it as anyone. And our conservation officer is in the audience, Mr. Phil Eberl, and you might be able to get to see him sometime in the break as well. Experience of heritage projects, I'm probably taking more than 3 minutes. I thought of the 3 C's really: complex, costly, and community interest. And they're kind of all interlinked, aren't they? Complex statutory provisions that we get into, just talked about urgent works notices and CPOs. You're really into legal wranglings once you start going down that road, and the appeals, and it can get really complex around that. It's obviously specialist areas. As a planner, you start to meet all these people with different skills, and sometimes those skills are complementary, but sometimes they're not, and they can conflict and pull in different directions. That makes it complex. You've always got a viability issue when it comes to listed buildings, and I can, someone once said to me, a developer will produce 3 or 4 viability reports, one for the bank, one for the local planning authority, one for the investors. That becomes very complex once you're into viability. And someone once said to me, in fact it was Phil Eberl in the audience, there are no difficult buildings, Graham, there's only difficult owners. And once you start getting into people, that gets really complex. Costly, really costly, officer time, immense amount of time from a local government perspective of officers' time involvement. Consultants, you need them involved, they never come cheap of course. The building itself, when you actually get into doing the work, suddenly costs start to accelerate and go out of control. We went in and did an urgent works notice in default, which is like I said. Suddenly the cost started to go up tenfold. And also costly for my health, because as someone has to make some of these decisions, you can have some sleepless nights around it. And I also talked about community interest. We've heard a lot about that, and about listed buildings and where they sit in their community and the ownership that they have. What I think, there are kind of 3 bits of community interest. There's the majority of locals who have some interest in these buildings and want to see something happen. And then you have kind of the local historian who's really passionate about the building, but perhaps is a bit on the edge, of actually what's being reasonable. And then sometimes you have the local know-it-all as well, who just knows everything and just tells everyone, and no one else is right, and they can be really difficult people to deal with. And finally, I guess there's 2 more C's that I thought about during the presentation: capital and commitment.
Gosh, how do I follow that? I'm probably the pauper on this bench here. My name is Ewan Richards, I'm Director of the Scottish Historic Buildings Trust, and we're a building preservation trust with over 35 years of experience working throughout the whole of Scotland. We have £3 million worth of assets rather than 300 million, so we're definitely at the bottom end of the market. But I suppose where we fit into this equation is that we are active on the ground, and the buildings that we take on are usually not commercially viable because the commercial sector would take them on board themselves. However, that's for the capital project because we can raise funding from organisations like the lottery, but they do have to be viable and sustainable in the future, otherwise we as a charity wouldn't exist. We've struggled to work in partnership with the commercial sector over the years and over the 35 years, mainly because in the past funders didn't like private individuals benefiting from public money, but the Lottery Enterprise Grant has opened up a whole new range of opportunities for us for the future. In the past we acted as a revolving fund building preservation trust where we sold a lot of our buildings upon completion, but again funders decided they would invoke clawback, so any profit that we did make that we could introduce into the new project went. We have had a couple of projects where we have worked in a more oblique way in partnership, and that's by using Section 75 agreements, where we've, on one project, Greenlaw Town Hall in the Scottish Borders, we managed to persuade a local landowner to gift us some land that we were able to sell to a housing association, and the money for that came into the capital project to save the town hall. But where we could add value to that is we sold it with planning permission, and the planning permission was for 16 affordable houses. So not only did we manage to save a building in the heart of a community, and again a lot of our buildings are in the hearts of communities, but we were able to provide much needed affordable housing within the community as well. So it really helps to kickstart the regeneration. Another unusual project that we're working on, the Prince's Regeneration Trust are aware of it, is a project in Aberdeen, where our hope is, if the project actually goes forward, again through a Section 75, we're taking the oldest building on a 4-hectare site, which will be divided up and sold to commercial developers. They will contribute via the Section 75 towards the cost of the repairs of this very important building. So there are two experiences of working with the commercial sector, slightly different, I suspect, than others, but may give you something to think about for your project. As I say, the Heritage Enterprise Grant is the future for us. I was delighted to see the Edinburgh Rubber Factory for the grant application, as well as doing our own projects. We help other organisations and managed to secure the printmakers 5 million, I think it was, for their projects. So we see that very much as the future for projects that we do, because they all have to generate an income at the end of the day. So the commercial element of it is much more beneficial to us.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Lewis. I'm the Property Director of Town Centre Securities, and you heard from my chairman earlier, so I won't say any more about Town Centre. I think you know, at Section 75, the equivalent is a Section 106 down here, as I deal in both Scotland and England. Our involvement with heritage assets is both indirect and direct. Indirectly, through a combination of the Town Centre Securities plc and the Marjorie and Arnold Ziff Charitable Trust. Arnold Ziff was the founder of Town Centre Securities. We have supported the restoration of Leeds Grand Theatre, Leeds Art Gallery and Roundhay Park Gardens, to name a few. We are also very active members of the Leeds Community Foundation, which supports many social groups in the deprived areas of the city, and often that is interesting how it brings together some heritage buildings, because they tend to be given these social groups sort of buildings which have fallen into disrepair, or they'll go and sort of set up in there, and it's quite interesting how the two have come together. Our direct involvement, and probably most interesting direct involvement, has come through the ownership of the Rochdale Canal, which Arnold Ziff purchased in the 1970s, clearly with an eye to development and opening up some of the waterfronts, because you'll be aware that a lot of the canals had their backs turned on them. And much of the Rochdale Canal was actually non-navigable. And its biggest problem, because it came with it quite some responsibility, was that when it arrived in Manchester at Piccadilly Basin, which is actually sort of on the fringe of Ancoats, so quite interesting, and was actually put forward as a World Heritage Site at one point, it's where the Rochdale Canal met the Ashton Canal. There were 3 listed buildings, but all Grade 2 star listed buildings, which had fallen into complete disrepair. And at that point, the canal was not navigable either, so it was very difficult to get life back into that area of the city. I've got to say, very much brokered by Manchester Council, who I find quite forward-thinking in many ways. They came to us and said, look, the British Waterways Board, as was, have got some Millennium funding, and they need to open up the canals, but they need to actually own the canal. So how do you feel about giving them the canal? Well, not really that clever. I sort of think, well, it's not the best thing to do. But it was quite interesting how, working with all 3 parties, the council, ourselves and British Waterways Board, we actually did come up with a plan that was, we gave the canal to the British Waterways Board for £1. In return, we were supported with an ERDF grant of £4 million, where we actually got, it was £2 million grant, £2 million from ourselves, to refurbish the canal through the Piccadilly Basin, put new locks in, put new towpaths down, put new pedestrian bridges across, and that gave us the confidence then to actually tackle 1 or 2 of the listed buildings. So Jackson's Warehouse became 40 duplex apartments, and Carver's Warehouse, which is the oldest stone warehouse in Manchester, became a commercial development. And our involvement with that continues. We have another listed mill to tackle it called Brownsfield Mill, and it's been a very interesting experience throughout, so hopefully I'll be able to give you some pointers if that's appropriate.
Thank you very much indeed, panel. I thought I'd just kick off with a couple of questions, and I want to open it up to the audience, so give some thought to the questions that you'd like to ask our illustrious panel. Can I start perhaps with one myself? So Is working in partnership with the private sector an attractive and viable option for community groups looking to deliver heritage regeneration? Why? I thought I'd ask Una to kick off on that one.
Yes, if you could make it happen. And say, we've really struggled for the commercial partnerships, but absolutely the work that we do must involve the community, because our buildings are in the hearts of communities, and we're a national organisation, so we rely heavily on the communities being a key partner for our projects, from basic support and trying to save a building through to actually putting their hands in their pocket and putting some money on the table. And Greenlaw, which we did in the Scottish Borders, it's a community of 600 people, and the town hall was plonked right in the middle of the village. The village was divided, half wanted to save it, half wanted to see it demolished, and it wasn't, it's a very poor community. But we managed to persuade them to work with us to try and save the building and even put some money on the table. Now, it wasn't an awful lot of money, it was a £2 million project, so it wasn't an expensive one, and I think we raised about £4,000 from the village of Greenlaw, but it was an important £4,000 because it showed other funders and other contributors that actually the community cared. So it is really important for us, and we're now working with the community to try and take over the direct management of the building. So it's taken a few years, but it's taken time to get the community up to speed to be able to do it.
Chris, your experience as a French developer?
We speak different languages, so I think it's actually very, very difficult, particularly if you're dealing with a property developer. I think it's probably easier if you're dealing with a local company that might be going to occupy the building. But property developers speak this kind of weird language of cost plans and internal rates of return, and they have completely different ideas about what's important. And so, I hope you're going to go to Jess next, but I think the idea that you have to put an awful lot of effort in to matchmaking in the first place, but then it's almost like marriage guidance, teaching both sides to speak together and speak the same language and learn how to get on. It's a really difficult challenge, I think. It's great that HLF have put this challenge, because a community and a developer together can be a real powerful partnership, but it isn't easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much in the past these relationships have been mediated by local government, and that what's really crucial now with this challenge is how do we create the relationship more directly. The Brokers project uses this typology of dating, mating, translating and relating. So it is about dating, it's about helping them to meet, because actually we think that developers and communities don't go to the same parties, they don't rub shoulders, they don't get to meet. It's not that easy to find one from whichever side you come from. Mating, so fair and effective agreements, coming to a deal together. And then translating, picking on Chris's point, they speak different languages, they need a way to understand each other. And relating, as in marriage guidance, when things go wrong, there will be inevitable cross-cultural conflicts. And I think you just have to accept that that is going to happen. And so we kind of want to show that relationship management is as important as accurate costings or good design. It's that important to the fundamental project development, and that's why the Brokers project is trying that out with a few to see what can we learn from those to take forward into relationship support in the future.
I just wondered, Graham, if you wanted to talk about perhaps picking up those issues, what it is that local authorities might be able to do almost to act as a broker. I mean, you sort of joked at the beginning, maybe you should have been sitting between Jess and Chris as a sort of... I think it would be really helpful for people to understand what local authorities can bring to that.
Thanks. I guess the first thing to say about what local authorities can bring to it is going to be a reality check around the future, and you won't go to any meeting or any conference where there's someone from local government saying that the face of local government is going to change significantly over the foreseeable future because the money isn't there. So the role of the local government officer is clearly going to change, actually, because where we might have been doing a lot more brokerage previously, we're just not going to have the resources to do that in the future. So you might have to find the community groups and the developer partners going to have to find someone else to do your marriage guidance counselling, because it's probably not going to sit in local government particularly. Having said that, there's two things probably that are important to say, because local governments aren't going to go away. The first thing is the role of the locally elected member, because those people, either the county councillor or the town and community councillor, they're actually being democratically elected by the community. So I think it's really important that you ensure that you engage with them. It doesn't have to be the officers, the bureaucrats, if you like we are. There's a democratic role. And I think that's really important, sometimes kind of missed, that the first port of call for developers and community groups is to go knocking on the door of the town hall, when actually there might be someone in the local community who's democratically elected who knows how the wheels work internally. The other thing is, there is still going to be a role for local government, and that will be probably down the statutory route. So I alluded before to the fact that the Denby Hospital case in Denbighshire that we have gone down a statutory route, and that's going to be really powerful. And I think that's probably where you're going to find local authorities wanting to concentrate on the harder edge when it comes to that, as opposed to the softer side of the discussions, just through resources. Not because we don't want to, I think because it's about resources. The problem with the statutory route, of course, is it brings its own problems for local government, and then there are extra costs around that. But I think in working in partnership, that's the sort of thing we might be seeing. So it'll be a bit of a mix, but I think the local government is certainly going to change.
Thank you very much. Richard, just from your point of view as a developer, I mean, I'd be interested to know whether you agree that the local authority should play that role, but also what you find is the barrier in terms of dealing with community groups. What do you think causes the biggest issue and why it doesn't happen more often?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is that the trouble with the developer per se is that they're actually not a long-term investor. They tend to come, pitch up and go. And so they don't have that longer-term view. Whereas if you're a developer investor, then you do, and you know that for sustainable development to actually be successful, you do need to take with the local community. They need to be part of that decision making, because it will always then be they will feel part of the scheme. So the local authority definitely has a key role to play in bringing together the right groups to you, because it was alluded to, there are all sorts of different groups, pressure groups here, there and everywhere. And it's actually been able to direct you better as to which ones that you really do need to engage with to stop you being sort of kiboshed on the way.
Great, thank you very much. I wanted to open it up to the audience now, so if you have some questions you'd like to ask, could you put your hand up? I've slightly got the light in my eyes, so if I'm not responding, please wave your paper and I'll hopefully see you. Who would like to ask a question? Right, in the centre here, Vicky.
Just going back to...
So there's a microphone coming out.
Oh, sorry. It caught my attention, the ERDF money for renovating the canal. I thought that ERDF money was tied to jobs.
The renovation of the canal actually came from Millennium Grant funding. The ERDF funding, although did sit alongside it because it wasn't sufficient to actually create the pedestrian bridges across the canal and do some fairly substantial piling infrastructure work. Well, that was then tied to us carrying out a commercial development on the Carver's listed warehouse. So it was linked to jobs. Yeah, it was.
What would the panel suggest would be the first line of questioning or engagement if a developer and a community group had the opportunity to sit together in the room and discuss a particular building that they both wanted to see a future for?
I think this is about understanding self-interest, really. It's about recognising that both those groups have legitimate agendas, and that those are probably different, but that there will be some common ground. So, as with all kind of counselling or mediation, it's about understanding what the common ground is, where do we stand, each of us, and what do we care about. And I think that you do also have to recognise that it doesn't often happen that you just get a chance to have that kind of open chat. That often there'll be some baggage in the background behind that. So some bad behaviour, as it were, might have happened already. Perhaps a campaign, potentially quite active, possibly even quite hostile campaign by a community. Some behaviour on the developer or owner's part that could be said to be fairly bad behaviour, taking roofs off, or just difficult kind of attitude. You don't come into this fresh and nice to each other. So there's something about kind of getting over that, recognising it, saying, we understand that we come from different perspectives, let's see how we can come back together. And I would really criticise the idea that there are the right groups and that local government knows who the right groups are. That actually some of what you might think of as the wrong groups because they've been hostile and difficult turn into fantastic deliverers of projects over the long term. And all these projects, I'm sure we'd all recognise, are long-term projects. So my experience with Hastings Pier, Ancoats experience, ADT's experience with Ancoats Dispensary, you begin as campaigners and you have to do that in order to save the building in the first place. But you can turn into true partners. And I think that's the same from the other side as well. Developers might start as nasty, evil pigs, but they quite quickly, many of them, can come over to the light side.
I don't recognise that in developers at all as a government officer. I think one thing I would say is you've got two people in the room there. You've got the developer and the community group. I think you do need to think about local governments and their role. And my recommendation would be think the elected members. And I did that before, and I say that because they've got competing. They're going to be involved in lots of competing interests because they're representing a community and they're on the council. So that someone's going to be wanting to close a library down or close a school down, and yet you're wanting, in the end, you will want something off the council. And I think you're going to have to get the councillor, the local members, to see the kind of the vision and the outcome, and get them to understand why it's going to be good for their community and good for them. Because people like to be attached to success. So closing a school down or doing that isn't successful. Members don't, although they've got those difficult decisions, they don't. If you can say that we can turn this into something that's really positive and get members on board, then I think you've got a good chance. Yes, you've still got to work with these two sorting themselves out and get that, but you do need something from the local government, and you're going to need member involvement and members on board. Doesn't matter how much you get the officers on board. If the members aren't on board, you won't get the local government, local authority on board.
It's commonality is what you need. Getting them in the same room for a kick-off is a start. And actually then being honest with each other as to, often they're not honest with each other as to what they're seeking to get out on both sides. And that is really crucial, that you've got to go in it, be honest, be brave and say, well look, this is what we need out of this. How do we work together?
Yeah, I have to say, in all the work that we've done with community groups, we've been trying to bring different groups together, not just community groups and developers, but actually across a whole range of stakeholders. It's only when you all start to buy into a common vision of what you're trying to achieve that you can make any progress at all. All the time that you're all fighting for your own individual vision and not willing to give even a millimetre for somebody else, it's really difficult to do that. I would say the point that Richard picked up, which is a really important one, is understanding the person who's on the other side of the table, because there are different types of developers. You know, there are developers who are in there for the long term, there are developers who actually don't develop, they just buy and sell sites, trader developers. So, you know, understanding who you're dealing with and not assuming that every single developer is exactly the same, because they're not. They do have different approaches. Right, I think we have a question from Mr. Lush.
Thank you, Ros. Ian Lush, Chief Executive of the Architectural Heritage Fund. But first, to pick up on something that Jess was saying. Jess is absolutely right that the campaigning group often turns into the group that then will take the project forward. But what we always say is that's great, and you need that passion and that zeal and that energy, but you also need to bring new people on, just as Hastings Pier Trust has, and Jess has been involved with that for many years, because some of the campaigners will have antagonised absolutely everybody in the local community as very much part of what they've been doing. And so you need to bring new people, perhaps with slightly less zeal and a bit more cool, calm negotiating powers. And you also need to recognise that the people who have the skills to do the campaigning and even some of the fundraising aren't necessarily then the right people to run a project. I have a question though for the panel, which is when you've got a big set of buildings, maybe like the ones in Aberdeen or other big projects, and you've got a developer, and you've got the local authority hopefully operating as the broker, and you've got the community group. How do you avoid the situation we've seen time and again, and PRT have also come up against this, but basically all the developer wants to do is to give the community group the most difficult, most intractable listed building and get on and make lots of money from the rest of the site? How do you avoid that so that the community group ends up with something that's almost impossible to actually make a sustainable return from?
To be honest, at the end of the day, if that is the approach, it's not going to happen. And so a developer needs it to happen to actually make money and move on, if that's what they're doing, or stay reinvested. And to have that sort of approach, to me, is, well, it's the wrong person, because it isn't. You're just not going to happen. You're not going to get away with, oh, well, that's yours, you get on with it, because I'll make money on the rest. Because, we've heard about all the cuts in everything. It's just not going to happen. It's not practical.
Gosh, we're absolutely in that situation with this building in Aberdeen, which is in the heart of this 4-hectare site, and the owner, who is not the developer, is actually ring-fencing this building, saying, here's your bit, get on with it. And we're sitting there saying, well, that's fine, but we can't actually get access to our building because it goes through the rest of 6 other development sites. So it's a challenge. I suppose our role as a building preservation trust can allow that kind of development to happen because we can attract funding, and if this arrangement in Aberdeen works, then it will benefit the rest of the site. What we do is quite often is act as pioneering developer. So we go in before the commercial developers come in. We take the most difficult and the most important listed building in the centre of a site or a town quite often, and that gives the commercial developers confidence. That's not necessarily recognised by the commercial developers because we're still there struggling to make ends meet and delivering this project, where the developers round about us can make fast profits on the back of us. So there is an interesting dilemma for the future, because I suspect the arrangement in Aberdeen will happen more and more on difficult and complex sites, but it's finding the balance between the commercial side and the charitable side, I think.
Local authorities do struggle with this viability issue a little bit, because we often haven't got the expertise and reliant on others. But I guess it's in the developer interest to make sure that what's going to happen in the whole site is sustainable. Because what the developer doesn't want is to carry out a development but still part of the site remains derelict, because that's going to detract from the overall development. So I think there's a role for local government to make them understand and see that. That can be controlled a little bit through things like planning briefs. So local authorities can prepare a planning brief that kind of sets out some of the parameters for the way that the site can be developed, and act there as a kind of a bit of an honest broker around it as well, and trying to be fair. And in the end, there is the issue of the actual planning permission, the 106 agreement, that can tie some things up. So there's a role again for local government in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think this thing about a fair and effective agreement is the crucial thing. When I was working for locality, we did a lot of work between local authorities and communities in terms of community asset transfer, and it was we were often talking about a balancing portfolio, that don't just give us the lemons, you have to give us something that will balance that, which means holding out, really. It's a negotiation, but of course that's really difficult because communities often care about the lemon as well. They really care about that building, but you have to hold out for some other kind of balance that will help with that.
The community and the developer should be in a joint venture partnership, a proper commercial partnership. So if there's a bad bit and a good bit, they should be shared, and one should be subsidising the other. Increasingly, government is making it possible for communities to be developers, and for me that's the future.
Like many others in the room, we have also seen this many, many times, and I sat with developers at MIP and talked about site and said, you have it, Ross, you have it. Thank you very much. And which endowment is going with it. So I think that it's understanding that these sites, and when you're an enthusiastic community group, actually it is quite hard. I absolutely agree with that. It's the thing you love, it's the thing you want to save. So when somebody says to you, you can have it for £1, this seems like a fantastic deal, until you understand the level of investment that's needed, and actually the size of the problem you're taking off the hand of the person who's trying to transfer it to you. So it probably comes back again to understanding the motivations of the different parts of that discussion. And I do entirely endorse what was said about Section 106 agreements. I think they are the key way in Section 75 in Scotland of pinning it down, making sure that the right funding goes to support that historic building, and you don't have the issue that Una's talked about. Right, next question.
It's more of an observation really, because we haven't really talked very much about the importance of ongoing brokering, because what we find is it's okay, you can sometimes get the commercial developer and the community group in the room at the outset, and it can establish some ground rules, and I agree with Chris about a joint venture partnership. That's not always possible. And then they'll go off and they'll do their separate things. And then they'll come back again when there's conflict. And often the conflict will be when they come around to sign the terms of the lease or to discuss procurement or something like that. I think there is a real important role for ongoing brokering and having someone who is impartial, not on the side of the developer or on the side of the community group, but actually having a brokering role, which the local authorities can't do, don't have the resources to do in detail. So I'd like to hear a bit more about how that might work, but I'd also just like to say that employing someone in a project is an eligible cost for a Heritage Enterprise Programme. In fact, we would encourage it to make sure that those projects that we fund are more likely to be successful in the long term.
I have to say that the thing that we have found that is most critical in terms of keeping the project together and not allowing that, what started as a common vision to move to being a less shared vision, is having a really strong steering group that meets on a regular basis. And it sounds absolutely simple and obvious, but I can tell you I've been involved in projects where the developer's taken the view that he didn't want to do it, and the whole thing has fallen apart because people have lost what it was they bought into. You need to keep bringing them back together regularly to reinforce and to keep it on track. Anyway, let me hand on to others for...
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's really important to achieve sustainable development. And in Manchester, we were one of the founding members, along with Argent, actually, of Piccadilly Partnership, public-private partnership that's still going, has its own now, it's self-funding, chief executive. And the pure role of that is to work with the community, continue to work with the community, come up with ideas that they're trying to promote and, achieve ideas they're trying to promote and work with them, and it helps that engagement, so it stops it becoming divorced again.
We find the ongoing brokering much more important in projects that are in the hearts of communities where the building is being used by the community. If it's a building that we lease out for offices, it's much more straightforward because there's a landlord-tenant relationship. But when it's a building that has a use that the community are taking just a room in the building, the ongoing brokering is critical. In those instances, we use the local authorities quite a lot, and we've got good relationships with a number of local authorities that help us. But it's quite a challenge because for us, it's an awful lot of work and effort once our project's completed, and after the funders have stopped paying the money, it's an ongoing mentoring and brokering service that we have to provide, and that's an ongoing challenge for us.
Yeah, I don't know where you get these independent, neutral brokers from, because it's difficult to do that. The project management, I think, is absolutely key as well, and that's often overlooked, and not enough resources are put into that, and having some sort of single project manager who can oversee it all, and if the grants can help pay for that, then I think that's a really useful thing, because it's not wasted money at all, it actually adds total value to the project. To support Ros's comment on the steering group, and perhaps to give PRT a bit of PR, the neutral broker, if you like, in the Denby Hospital project is the Princess Regeneration Trust, and they do get an income for that, and the council have willingly engaged with the Princess Regeneration Trust to allow them to do that, because it helps take the project forward. That's been really useful for us, and they do share the steering group, and we have a steering group set up, so I can say from experience the steering group has helped push and nudge the project along, keep people on board, have those regular discussions. We do have a telephone conference, but we do meet up on a quarterly basis as well, and that face-to-face with different people around the table is really important. So the steering group idea is certainly one that's worked on that project, and I suspect, as from your experience, Ros, worked on a lot of other projects, and is a very useful starting point.
Yeah, I think what Chris said earlier about joint ventures being the best approach, and that part of that is because it forces you to meet frequently and regularly. But if you're not in a joint venture, then staying in touch in that way is crucial. So regular meetings, including sort of social or informal meetings, so it's not all about formal kind of board meetings, and getting each side to experience each other's worlds. So a little plug for the locality convention in November in Cardiff. You know, locality convention is a place full of community groups, but it's also a place that's very welcoming potentially to developers, and it's the kind of place that they'll get an insight into the kind of socially entrepreneurial community. Perhaps invite to MIPIM. Ros mentioned MIPIM, you know, so maybe community groups should actually start to try to go to places that developers go to, so mutually inviting each other. But I obviously do think that brokering is important. I do think we can get independent brokers. That's what the pilot is about, to see how that works. And then if that works, then we will try and grow that into a much bigger service with lots more brokers. I would say it's actually quite hard to be a broker because you're listening to both sides. It's quite an emotional and difficult experience. So with the pilot, we have in each case a lead broker and a sounding board broker, so that the person who's doing the lead brokerage role has somebody else to kind of talk to and say, this is actually quite hard, and how can I stay fair, stay impartial, but be properly engaged. So I do think there's a great possibility for an independent, long-term service of brokerage that wouldn't involve local government and would leave local government to do its proper jobs, as you said, particularly the statutory role when you've got delinquent owners. You really do need a local government because they're the only ones with the power in that case.
I'd like to do a little bit of brokering to start with, because I know that Jess is working for a community group in Piccadilly in Manchester looking to save the old fire station. So Richard, Jess, Richard, maybe afterwards. And the other observation is actually Ros and I are paired brokers on a project in Bradford, and I can see that both the kind of commercial orientated group and the community orientated group have got masses to bring to the project, but they've been put in a position to compete against each other, so by the local authority actually. So barriers have been put in there, but I'm also looking down the barrel of what feels like 5 to 10 years worth of commitment, Ros. So you know, it is tough. I think these brokers are going to be really special people actually.